Welcome to Openbooks. This is a gathering place for inspirational stories from outstanding figures around the world. We believe that the wise words of celebrities hold profound insights. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, successfully led the nation through the end of the Civil War, preventing the federal union's division and abolishing slavery. Despite his exceptional achievements, Lincoln faced personal hardships, grappling with inner vulnerabilities and self-doubt. His image is immortalized on the $5 bill as a testament to his greatness. Lincoln's journey was marked by adversity from his impoverished childhood to the challenges of being a president during tumultuous times. Born in the harsh winter of 1809 in a hunter's cabin, Lincoln's childhood was marred by poverty. His mother, Nancy Hanks, an uneducated woman, raised him alone as a single mother. After her untimely death from an incurable disease when Lincoln was only 9, he was left to fend for himself in the care of his indifferent father, Thomas Lincoln. The family struggled to make ends meet, often relying on meager earnings from Thomas's odd jobs and hunting. Lincoln's life took a significant turn when his mother passed away, leaving him to grapple with the grief and hardships on his own. The lack of maternal guidance led to a dirty and disorderly home. However, despite these challenges, Lincoln adapted to the harsh realities of life, finding comfort in simple pleasures like warming himself by the fire during winter storms. This early experience with adversity shaped Lincoln's resilience and self-sufficiency. The story unfolds as Lincoln perseveres through life's hardships, eventually emerging as one of the greatest presidents in American history. The father and son often lived in tattered clothes, rarely bathing in winter, and emanating a foul odor in the summer. It wasn't until a year later, when Thomas remarried, that their situation improved. This painful experience profoundly shaped Lincoln's lonely and melancholic character throughout his life. His mother's hardships instilled in him deep empathy for the vulnerable, always extending a helping hand whenever possible. In one instance during a move, crossing a river with swift currents, everyone safely made it to the other side, except for a little dog. No one was willing to risk crossing again for the dog, except for young Lincoln, who braved the rushing waters to carry the small dog to safety. Despite these unfortunate circumstances, a stroke of luck came when, at the age of 15, a rudimentary school opened in their wooded area. Lincoln finally had the chance to learn to read, and he cherished this opportunity immensely. Writing on wooden boards when paper was unavailable, copying textbooks when he couldn't afford them, Lincoln voraciously read about history, literature, politics, and even joke books. Reading opened up a new world for him, and he aspired to become an outstanding orator. His father, Thomas, continuously berated Lincoln for being lazy, discouraging him from such foolish pursuits. Thomas even publicly chastised him, physically punishing him on occasion. This wasn't the first time Thomas had been physically harsh with Lincoln. Despite the difficult years they spent together after his mother's death, Thomas had a bad temper, leading to a strained and hostile relationship between father and son. As Lincoln grew older, their interactions dwindled, and he didn't even visit Thomas on his deathbed. Lincoln believed that meeting would only lead to further discord and sadness. Despite Thomas's opposition, Lincoln's passion for learning persisted. Whether reciting Hamlet's lines while herding cattle or sharing jokes with farmers during farm work, Lincoln's enthusiasm for self-education remained unyielding. He attended court proceedings in a town miles away during his free time, despite having less than a year of formal education in his entire life. Lincoln's genius-level speaking abilities and rich knowledge in law and politics were all products of his relentless self-study. When nominated as a presidential candidate, Lincoln acknowledged his limited formal education but attributed his success to recognizing the importance of knowledge and accumulating it through continuous self-study. Tired of agricultural life, Lincoln yearned for a job where he could engage with more people, hoping to build a great career based on his speaking talents. Lincoln's professional journey, however, was marred by repeated hardships, marking the second misfortune in his life. His initial job as a boatman involved transporting lumber from the forest to downstream shipyards. The days spent drifting on the river were far from peaceful, as the dense forest along the riverbanks led to heightened insecurity. One night, Lincoln's vessel encountered a group of menacing thugs, armed with knives and clubs, threatening to kill the crew. Although they narrowly escaped harm, Lincoln was struck on the forehead by one of the assailants' knives, leaving a deep scar above his right eye. Remarkably, this perilous encounter did not instill hatred toward black people in Lincoln. On the contrary, witnessing farm owners cruelly whipping and selling slaves like livestock filled him with profound pain and anger. Due to his diligent work, Lincoln quickly earned a promotion. His employer arranged for him to work as a clerk in the company's grocery store while simultaneously managing a bone mill and sawmill. The workplace was located in the town of New Salem, Illinois. Lincoln spent 6 years here, during which his life underwent significant transformations. New Salem boasted an independent literary society, and Lincoln, a fervent reader, swiftly became a central figure. During society gatherings, he shared stories, recited poems he had written, and provided immediate commentary on topics ranging from forest navigation to political affairs. These invaluable experiences not only broadened Lincoln's horizons, but also instilled confidence in his speaking abilities. Lincoln aspired to run for the Illinois state legislature and prepared his first formal speech. In the conclusion, he wrote, "I was born of the lower class, and growing up, I had no relatives to assist me. Yet, I am accustomed to disappointment. If you find me unsuitable to lead, I will not harbor resentment." Though Lincoln faced defeat this time, he began to gain recognition locally and gradually be accepted. Besides his outstanding oratory skills, Lincoln's character earned significant respect. After accumulating some savings, Lincoln and a friend started a small grocery store. Unfortunately, due to poor management, the store quickly went bankrupt, leaving behind substantial debts. Lincoln's partner, an alcoholic, died, and Lincoln, despite legal loopholes to evade some debt, willingly assumed all responsibilities. Even 14 years later, while serving as a congressman, Lincoln continued repaying this debt. Following bankruptcy, Lincoln took a part-time job collecting postage fees for the Postal Service. The fees would be stored with Lincoln for a period before being submitted to the post office. Though facing financial difficulties, Lincoln never misappropriated a single penny from the postal funds. When the postal auditor came to settle accounts, Lincoln always returned the exact coins he had received. During this period, Lincoln self-studied commentaries on the laws of England, a book he found amidst the waste at the grocery store. After gaining a considerable understanding of the law, Lincoln secured an apprenticeship as a lawyer. Despite facing financial constraints, he never raised his legal fees, often criticized by colleagues for disrupting market prices. Lincoln explained that many procrastinating litigants, much like himself, were impoverished, and exorbitant fees troubled his conscience. While his legal career progressed smoothly, Lincoln didn't cease his political endeavors. 2 years after his initial unsuccessful bid for office, at the age of 25, Lincoln was elected as a state legislator, subsequently serving 3 terms, a rare period of smooth sailing in his life. However, misfortune struck again. After accumulating experience as a state legislator, 38-year-old Lincoln was elected to the U.S. Congress in 1847, marking his first arrival in Washington. At the time, the United States was engaged in the Mexican-American War, an aggressive conflict initiated to expand slavery. Lincoln opposed the war and delivered a speech condemning it as a mission to protect the innocent, conveniently forgetting it was a campaign of plunder and murder with no glory to claim. Although no one in Congress paid attention to Lincoln, and his words were disregarded, the speech stirred anger and hatred among his hometown folks. Illinois had 6,000 residents involved in the war, and they believed they were fighting for justice. They couldn't tolerate their elected representative branding them as killers. Aware of the severity of the situation, Lincoln remarked, "I am committing political suicide now." Regardless, he couldn't ignore his conscience to express support for the war. Faced with protests and opposition from his hometown, Lincoln was forced to withdraw from Congress, losing the good reputation he had built over the past decade. He felt his political life was irrevocably dead, enduring the insults and returning to his dusty law firm, resuming his role as a lawyer. It was the darkest period in Lincoln's life. Those who knew him claimed that it was from this time onwards that a somber and melancholic expression became Lincoln's most apparent characteristic. So, how did Lincoln cope with these pains? He didn't do anything special. He continued to read, handle cases, crack jokes as usual, and make those around him laugh. As Carnegie wrote, he chose to bear everything alone, solidifying the pain and keeping it aside. He never allowed emotions to dictate his actions or harm others. In this manner, Lincoln quietly lived through 6 years. During this period, the debate over the abolition of slavery escalated in the United States. In 1854, Lincoln's former political rival, Douglas, proposed the repeal of the Missouri Compromise, and it was passed by Congress as a policy to restrict slavery. He decreed that slavery was not allowed in the western territories north of Missouri. Now, its abolition implied the spread of slavery across the vast western regions. Upon hearing this news, Lincoln was furious. He challenged Douglas and delivered a meticulously prepared speech, systematically refuting Douglas's statements and offering profound reflections on the institution of slavery. This captivating speech brought Lincoln back into the spotlight, and his popularity began to rise again. However, in the subsequent state legislature elections, Lincoln suffered defeat. Disheartened and defeated, Lincoln returned to his law office. The courage he had mustered seemed to have depleted entirely. Sitting silently for a night, the first words he uttered were to his colleague, "I told you that a house divided against itself cannot stand. I will make slavery unable to persist." In the summer of 1858, after many failed attempts, Lincoln ran for office again. Fortune finally seemed to favor him, and this election went unusually smoothly. 2 years later, at the age of 51, Lincoln was nominated as the presidential candidate and ultimately elected as the 16th President of the United States. However, this shining presidency became Lincoln's third misfortune. His presidential term was fraught with crises and difficulties. While he ultimately fulfilled his duties, gaining immortal glory and reputation, it came at the cost of his life. During Lincoln's presidency, the United States faced its most turbulent times, with the nation divided into hostile northern and southern factions. The southern states, representing the interests of plantation owners, supported efforts to expand slavery. Meanwhile, the northern states advocated for the abolition of slavery. Within 2 months of Lincoln's election, 7 southern states declared independence, forming the Confederate States of America and initiating preparations for the Civil War, putting the nation on the brink of division. Lincoln understood that, in such a situation, only by facing and winning the war could the country be saved. However, he didn't abandon the possibility of peace. In his subsequent inaugural address, Lincoln appealed for peace to the Confederate States, saying, "I do not want a war between us. We are friends, not enemies. We cannot regard each other as adversaries. Although emotions may strain our relationships, we cannot sever our ties." Nevertheless, bullets were already loaded, and no one could prevent it. In April 1861, the American Civil War officially erupted, with the Confederate States demanding independence and supporting slavery, facing off against the Union led by Lincoln, opposing secession and slavery. The war's situation was extremely complex. Initially, the Northern armies suffered successive defeats, and at the most critical moment, Washington almost saw preparations to relocate the federal government to New York. The gold and silver treasures from Washington's treasury were also moved to Wall Street. A series of failures subjected Lincoln to nationwide criticism and condemnation. In a matter of months, he lost 40 pounds, became extremely anxious and despondent, constantly sighing, "What should I do? Lost again, once again lost." What troubled Lincoln wasn't just the battlefield defeats, but also his cabinet members. These seasoned politicians didn't take Lincoln seriously, considering him lacking in political experience and leadership skills, not aligned with him in governance, posing internal and external challenges. Lincoln had to unite his cabinet amidst these challenges. His Secretary of the Treasury, formerly an academic proficient in 3 languages, may have shown outward respect to Lincoln, but deep down, he harbored disdain for the president's humble origins and limited formal education. He often stirred up opposition against Lincoln, plotting secretly to take over the White House, promising greater benefits to those who supported his ascent to the presidency. Someone informed Lincoln of these machinations and suggested that he dismiss the secretary. Lincoln rejected the proposal, stating that the secretary was highly capable, and as long as he performed his duties well as Secretary of the Treasury, he wouldn't mind his presidential ambitions. However, he failed to understand Lincoln's magnanimity and foresight. Instead, the secretary, at the slightest inconvenience, threatened Lincoln with resignation. He submitted his resignation 5 times, and each time, Lincoln persuaded him to stay and contribute to the nation. However, on the 6th occasion, when the secretary offered to resign, Lincoln approved it. Lincoln could tolerate affronts, but not the secretary using his position as leverage for personal gain. Nevertheless, Lincoln awarded him the highest honor a U.S. president could bestow, appointing him Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The second figure was Secretary of War Stanton. Unlike Seward, Wells, and Chase, Stanton was short, obese, with a volatile and obstinate personality. Stanton and Lincoln first crossed paths while handling a legal case. They were lawyers on the same side. However, from the outset, Stanton disliked Lincoln, finding him ugly and describing him as clumsily resembling a chimpanzee. Even after Lincoln assumed the presidency, Stanton didn't curb his contempt, openly stating that Lincoln sat in the presidential throne at the White House, scratching his itches like a big star. Despite Stanton's insults causing great distress to Lincoln, when the nation needed a Secretary of War to address the turmoil, Lincoln immediately thought of Stanton. Lincoln declared, "I am determined to cast aside personal pride and appoint Stanton as Secretary of War." Lincoln's wisdom in recognizing and employing people, his magnanimous and tolerant demeanor, and his dedication to the nation gradually won over the stern Stanton. After Lincoln's assassination, the once stern man wept, proclaiming, "Here lies the most perfect leader in human history." As Lincoln gradually organized his cabinet and established a strong leadership, the war between the North and the South continued for 18 months, and the stalemate began to change. The Confederate States planned to sign a contract with England and France, seeking their support. If this plan succeeded, the Northern forces would be in a precarious situation. In response, Lincoln finally decided to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. Why did Lincoln wait until this moment? Though Lincoln harbored a deep-rooted abhorrence for slavery and desired its early demise, as president, he had been attempting more moderate approaches, such as compensatory emancipation. This was because only through such methods could the Northern Union gain the support of neutral states, increasing the chances of victory. Lincoln realized that his primary responsibility was to ensure the security of the Northern Union and the unity of the nation. He believed that if the Northern Union fell, slavery would persist in the entire United States for a more extended period. However, the dynamics had changed. To prevent intervention from England and France, Lincoln had to alter Europe's perception of the American Civil War. He was aware that European societies generally viewed slavery as evil. Once the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, the war would no longer be just an internal conflict for preventing national division. It would elevate into a holy war to dismantle the institution of slavery. At that point, powerful public opinion would force England and France to cease assisting the Southern Confederacy. In September 1862, Lincoln formally presented the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet, recognizing it as a risky decision. When proposing this, the usually modest Lincoln told his cabinet members, "I have not discussed this with any of you, but I have sworn to myself and to God that, regarding the proclamation in its entirety, I personally do not wish to make any modifications. I have decided to proceed in this way." After the proclamation's release, the situation briefly deteriorated. The Southern Confederacy became unprecedentedly united and enraged, while the Northern Union faced rebellion. Many white soldiers were unwilling to fight and sacrifice their lives for the rights of black people. The Army suffered setbacks, leading opponents to vehemently attack Lincoln, pressuring him to resign. Lincoln silently endured all the insults, having prepared for the worst before issuing the proclamation. He said, "Either preserve nobility or sorrowfully lose the world's last and yet best hope." Fortunately, a turning point emerged at the most desperate moment. The Confederate Army commander made a fatal mistake during the war, resulting in the annihilation of the main Confederate forces. Simultaneously, the power of the Emancipation Proclamation began to manifest, and public opinion started supporting Lincoln. Black individuals joined the Northern forces, sealing the fate of the South. In 1865, the Southern Confederacy surrendered, concluding the war that had claimed 500,000 lives over 4 years. The end was remarkably tranquil, devoid of parades with disarmed prisoners, humiliating rituals of signing surrender documents, or the execution of rebel soldiers' footsteps. Confederate officers were allowed to retain their weapons, and soldiers could return home directly. Lincoln personally announced these lenient measures, showcasing compassion and tolerance even in the direst circumstances. He ordered the release of soldiers who had deserted out of fear and homesickness. Lincoln stated, "I believe that if I were on the battlefield, I might also abandon my rifle." The extensive list of pardons he issued earned him vehement rebukes from Secretary of War Stanton. Due to his outstanding leadership, courage, and compassion during the war, Lincoln was re-elected as president, gaining immense popularity among the people. However, tragedy struck once again. In 1864, at the age of 54, while watching a play in a theater, Lincoln was assassinated. The assassin was a deranged actor seeking fame by exploiting Lincoln's reputation. Thus, Lincoln's life came to an end, and spontaneous grand mourning ceremonies were organized in his honor. Some even chose to end their lives in suicide as a symbolic gesture of accompanying him in death. However, difficulties arose in handling Lincoln's remains. With the consent of Lincoln's widow, Mary Todd, it was decided to bury Lincoln in his hometown and construct a special mausoleum. Yet, during the funeral ceremony, Mary suddenly had a change of heart, overturning the initial plans and demanding a change in Lincoln's burial location. This decision was influenced by a past disagreement with a person named Major Mock, and the street where the mausoleum was located happened to be named Mausoleum Alley. Although Mary's reasons seemed absurd, people had to comply with her decision, exhuming Lincoln's body and relocating it for burial. What kind of person was Mary, and what was Lincoln's family life like? For Lincoln, the greatest tragedy in his life was not the assassination but winning Mary Todd. The fourth misfortune in Lincoln's life was the unfortunate aspect of his family life. Before meeting Mary, Lincoln had a sweet first love named Anne, the daughter of a small hotel owner. They deeply loved each other and had plans to marry as soon as Lincoln became a lawyer. However, a year before Lincoln's legal career took off, and tragically passed away due to illness. Her death plunged Lincoln into immense grief, leading to the onset of nervous breakdown, a condition that plagued him throughout his life. Many years later, when recalling Anne, Lincoln still expressed sorrow, stating, "Others may think I have recovered well and can lead a happy life, but only I know how deeply I still grieve in private. I even dare not carry a small knife for fear of losing control." However, Lincoln's misfortunes did not end there. For years after Anne's death, Lincoln met Mary Todd. Mary, from a wealthy background, possessed a proud and fiery personality with a single-minded desire to marry a president. At that time, Lincoln was a member of Illinois, and after hearing one of Lincoln's speeches, Mary was captivated by his talent, initiating her pursuit. Lincoln, thinking he had finally found love, quickly proposed to Mary. However, on the day of the wedding, Lincoln failed to appear. He had fled. After Lincoln's proposal, Mary dropped the pretense of love and began implementing her plan to transform Lincoln, demanding that he adopt the appearance and behavior of nobility. Realizing his numerous terrible mistakes, Lincoln attempted to cancel the wedding several times but succumbed to Mary's tearful persuasion, ultimately fleeing on the day of the ceremony. This was the only time in Lincoln's life that his own cowardice led to harm to others. In recompense, he sacrificed his lifelong happiness. Between personal emotions and moral values, Lincoln compromised and married Mary. Although Mary got what she wanted, marrying Lincoln did not satisfy her. After marriage, she began to perceive Lincoln as useless, untidy, and weak. She frequently criticized and verbally abused him, even publicly berating him after he became president. During meals, Mary would pour hot coffee on Lincoln's face for no reason other than her own bad mood, while Lincoln silently wiped it away. Mary looked down on Lincoln's background and prohibited Lincoln's relatives from visiting their home. Despite Lincoln having a good relationship with his stepmother, they lived close by. But due to Mary's opposition, Lincoln's stepmother never set foot inside his house. This situation saddened and burdened Lincoln, and Mary was particularly jealous. She prohibited Lincoln from dancing with women at parties, insisting that he needed her approval to converse with them, or else she would create a scene. Moreover, Mary treated neighbors, friends, and colleagues vindicatively, always seeking to surpass others. Lincoln continuously apologized to friends on Mary's behalf for her rude behavior. This tragic family life exhausted Lincoln. He once sorrowfully told Mary, "You will ruin my entire life. This home has become like hell because of you." Despite this, Lincoln never abused or chose divorce. Aside from his wife, another source of sorrow for Lincoln was his children. 3 out of Lincoln's 4 children died at a young age. When his second child, Willie, passed away during a critical period of the Civil War, the pain of losing a child, coupled with the pressures of governance, almost drove the already somewhat nervous Lincoln to collapse. His personal physician even feared that he might not survive. Mary, unable to assist Lincoln, instead brought so-called spiritual experts into the White House, creating an eerie atmosphere. During that time, Lincoln could only release his emotions by reciting poetry. He often spent hours in his office loudly reading works by Shakespeare, reaching the part in King John, where the protagonist mourns for his deceased son, at which point Lincoln could not restrain his sobs. Despite being immersed in his own grief, Lincoln thought of the parents who suffered the loss of their children in the war, empathizing with their plight. He often personally wrote letters to them, offering comfort and blessings. This care and assistance to others became the strength that helped Lincoln overcome his misfortunes. Lincoln once said, "I hope that after I die, someone will describe me as one who removes thorns from every place where flowers can bloom." While not everyone may aspire to become a great president like Lincoln, the qualities of tolerance, understanding, and patience demonstrated by Lincoln during difficult times can serve as a source of strength for everyone facing adversity. Thank you all for tuning in today. We hope this channel becomes your daily source of inspiration, empowering you to achieve greater success in both business and life. We look forward to walking through the stories of each celebrity with you, sharing the joy of growth together.